Thank you, Barbara. I know it's siesta time, so if you put your head on the table, close your eyes, or snore a little bit, I won't be disturbed. I think we can filter it out with the camera editing, so feel free. So 45 minutes. I hope I can be disciplined and stick to the time. I come at first to the title, Histories of Activism. It's the first signal that says there is not only one activism. And you see it too, that beyond that, you can tell and narrate about one activism more histories than one. So we have a complex system of activisms and a complex system of histories about different activisms. So this is the first try to make our discussions a bit more complicated than they are already now. On the other hand, we have activisms of history, and of histories, of course. And in the panel I've been before the lunch time. This was in the center of the discussions regarding education and media, that any media form produced from any agency, produced under specific circumstances, creates its own narrative, its own narrations, its own histories. And now we have obviously, let's say, normal forms of creating narrations, and we have specific forms of creating narrations. And this specific forms own an own term. We call it activism. So not every narration, not every production of a narration is activism. We have a clear feeling for it. We have a clear recognition what is activism and what isn't. And about these two point of views, I want to speak a little bit. And at the end, I want to come to let's say, quite an arrogant claim. I want to say something about my and your job and what can we do about this. This is my meaning. Okay, so this presentation is brand new. The first ones you can hear it. Please be kind to me. This presentation can relate to a discussion we've had on Twitter this morning, especially between Thomas and Jerome, which I read carefully. And I found this Twitter discussion quite significant for the main topic we have here at the conference, to come to, let's say, a consensus about standards and about terms and about empirical cognition. So what is activism at all? And both I found reading the Twitter thread didn't came to a result, to a final result, so I'm happy to contribute to this Twitter thread now. And the second relation I want to make is a discussion I've had with Peter Gauci and Maria Gregorio this morning. So what is actually the difference between activities of any kind and activism as a specific activity? If every activity is activism, we don't need the term activism. We can just spare there. So what is it? Does it work? Yes. Okay, now. You know, I'm an educated teacher, and I've learned it's good to start with a story. And this story is about two young lads in 1987 in a small grammar school in a little godforsaken East German provincial town, really godforsaken, in the middle of nowhere. And these two lads attending the 11th class of this grammar school were confronted with an anniversary, the 70th anniversary of the Great October Revolution, which had to take place on, I think, 7th of October in 1987, following the Gregorian calendar, it's October 25th. So, all over the Eastern Bloc, all over the Soviet Empire, this day was celebrated in every factory, in every school, in every institution. And these kind of celebrations had a specific form, and the specific form has been developed at the very beginning of the modern times. It's the form of the anniversary ritus, also the jubileum ritus. So it's the sickness of celebrating anniversary for any kind of event. And it's rooted in Protestant culture, and actually it's also rooted in ancient medieval church culture, whatever. So we have rituals. There was, let's say, an appeal, a choreography of group movements, an official address from a person in charge, joint singing, poetry, recitation, and a formal goodbye. So this is the form in which these kind of events always took place. And this 7th of October in this godforsaken little provincial town was also meant to be this one, boring to death. And these two young lads were unsatisfied with this kind of events because they were inflamed communists. Yeah, they wanted to save the world, and they wanted to save the communist idea, and they were really fed up with this meaningless, old traditionalist kind of stuff which nobody wanted to hear anymore. That's why they were asking the president of this grammar school for the assignment to organize this anniversary. So this president was looking very bewildered. Why do you want to organize this shitty event? No, we are just, these two young lads. Yeah, we were feeling like that, we want to do something good, and so on. And you can imagine what these two activists were starting to do. They were doing the contrary to what has been expected. You can move this. Thank you. You see, this event was really great, celebrated all over Soviet bloc with stamps and so on. 70 years, successful years, 40 years society for German, Soviet friendship, and so on. So the idea of these two young lads was let's say, to disrupt this tradition and to lean on Heinrich Heine and his Germany a Winter's Tale. So the idea was Heinrich Heine returns to Germany with a time travel, you know, reenactment was growing in 1987. And looking at this Eastern Germany, what has become of his idea of communism 150 years ago. So it was quite funny. If you read this poem, you will see you can adapt it to any situation. It's quite nice. And it was accompanied not by boring singing, but by Hans Eisler songs, Mayakovsky songs, and so on. So it was a blasting bomb impact. And all the presidency of the grammar school, the party secretary, the officials, they were, let's say, they had big eyes and they couldn't understand what's happening there. And that's not our luck, because they were like paralyzed, yeah, they couldn't do anything. And everybody was speaking in the weeks afterwards about the communist idea and what does it really mean in contrary to the experiences you could make in Eastern Germany. And I tell you the story, you can imagine, you can go on. Yeah, thank you. Because you can see in this exemplary story some characteristics of activism. So we have a plus and we have a but, of course. I'm starting with a plus, yeah. So questioning traditions, rituals, institution habits, this is activism. By appealing to a greater truth, and the truth which let's say, the representatives of the system can't see anymore. Idealizing movement, change, honesty, it's all about change. Attempt to make things really better and accepting personal risks. The two young lads made some months later a second attempt in this direction. It didn't went so well like the first attempt, I can say. So this is the plus of this kind of habit we can see of these two young lads in 1987. Now we come to the buts. There were quite a lot of paradoxical effects. So the effect of re-ideologization. So all these co-pupils, the comrades, the school comrades, were fed up with socialism. They wanted liberty, they wanted freedom, they wanted to have, let's say, they wanted to come out of the Soviet system. We do, but another kind. But our, let's say, our performance was so successful that, let's say, in a setback, the discourse in the school moved towards how can we save socialism. So, and we did it because of referring to one-sided and poorly founded image of the past. Because our image of the October Revolution in 1917 was false. And this was the only reason, because for that we could connect it to Heinrich Heine. Because we thought that the ideas of the October 1917 Bolsheviks were the same as Heinrich Heine had in 1948. It's totally false. But this was the idea of education we had, let's say, experienced in the years before. So this is the first but effect of re-ideologization. Then we've had the Don Quixote effect, misjudging the societal context. So of course we could move something in the school climate, but 2 years afterwards everything was breaking down because it had no sense. And this kind of activism is not aware of societal context because it's oriented to the future, it's oriented to truth, it's oriented to specific ideas. And so this was also an effect of our performance. And the second Don Quixote effect is triggering non-intentional effects. Institutionally, see what is possible. Because we weren't sanctioned after the first attempt, because it was so stunning and so surprising, the party leadership could say, look how liberal we are. What a great country we are. Such things are possible. In the terms of content, these effects were undermining serious counter-narrations. For example, there was a magazine coming from Soviet Union. It was called Sputnik, and it was inspired by Gorbachev's perestroika. And we could read Sputnik, and Sputnik tried hard to, let's say, to destroy all the false myths about the Soviet Bolshevist revolution in 1917. And so, and now these two idiots, yeah, were running like a bomb into this scenery and wanted to do things better, but at the other hand, they created innovation which was, let's say, a counter-narration against the truth narration we could read in Sputnik. Sputnik was forbidden, by the way, half a year later, because it was full of counter-narrations against the official recount of the past. So next. So this is my agenda for the next 5 minutes. First was my story. Then I wanted to speak about Eucken and Hiller and die Erhebung. I want to tell you something about the origin of the activism concept. Then I want to discuss with you the point, is it a messy construct or does it belong to the essentially contested concepts? Then I will answer the very easy question, what is activism? Then I want to show you some more histories of activism. I think partly breathtaking, making then some systematics and coming to a summary. Let's come to Eucken. I'm sure you know Rudolf Eucken. It's a Nobel Prize winner, a German Nobel Prize winner of 1908. It was a famous philosopher at that time, a neo-Kantian philosopher, writing, let's say, a full library of books, crazy guy. And he was deeply impressed and deeply concerned with this Lebensreformbewegung, the life reform movement of the early 20th century. That's why this image I showed you to have some nice things this time. And his book, this famous book was called Grundlinien einer neuen Lebensanschauung, also outlines of a new view of life or towards life. And he was imprinting the term creational activism. And the meaning of creational activism, also schöpferischer Aktivismus, was that we tried to translate the life movement, the life reform movement to the academe. And the main idea of the life reform movement was to change everything because everything is spoiled. If you want to have a look to the spirit of that time, you go in Vienna to the Secession building. It's exactly the expression of that time. And this secession idea to break away, to make the real things, to break away from academe, to break away from traditionalist, institutionalist, and has grown up from an experience that the institutions and ideas didn't fit anymore to the reality of the everyday life of the early 20th century, which was characterized by mass migration. It's called urbanization, which was imprinted by the industrial revolutions and all the things Jules Verne has described in his novels. So, and the way Rudolf Eucken tried to translate these ideas from Lebensreform movement as a life reform movement to philosophy and to academe, to reunion academe and life reform movement, was to say we have to revolutionize our thinking. And this revolution of thinking was called creational activism. That book was amazingly successful. And it's not by accident that just 1 year later, we've got the Nobel Prize for Literature. We cannot overestimate Rudolf Eucken when we speak about activism and the idea and the origin of activism. I could say a lot more about this neo-Kantianism and so on, but more important, I think, for the moment, is that Rudolf Eucken became successful to the arts too, and it wasn't by surprise. We are speaking about the great secession here in Vienna. And it was 1914, shortly before the outbreak of the First World War, that Kurt Hiller was adopting Rudolf Eucken's term. And he used it. It was the first instrumentalization of this term against his contrahands of expressionism. So you know, in art, not only in art, sometimes also in academia, you make your career by distinct yourself from others. So Hiller's idea was, okay, expressionism is quite successful. When I want to make a name, I have to found a new school, and his new school was the art activism. And he adopted the Eucken idea that the art he wanted to push was an art of thinking, an art of imagination. It was an art of the whole spirit of mankind. So it's very near to Rudolf Eucken, but thought as an art performance action. So expressionism in the thinking of Hiller was just concentrated on, let's say, to express the inner feelings in an adequate way to the outside. Now it was about to revolutionize these inner feelings. Throughout the First World War, this concept was furthermore developed by a small circle of arts around Hiller. But it came to 1919, to the first activist congress in Berlin. And this first activist congress is now much more famous than that time. It was not a success. Just 150 people came to Berlin, only from Berlin. They invited from all over Europe. It was quite a failure. But I'm speaking about this congress because, thank you. In the context of this congress, a lot of publications were published, and one of them was Die Erhebung. When I translate it to English, it would be, you may call it the Revolt, yearbook of new poetry and valuation. And you see on the term of valuation that this kind of thinking wanted to accept nothing from the past and wanted to found thinking, society, group relations, sexual relations, everything on a totally new foundation. And in this yearbook, there is an article from Hiller, and this article is called Ortsbestimmung des Aktivismus, translated positioning of activism. And this is like a foundation document of the idea, and we can, if you want to understand what activism is, we can resort on this document until today. So, 4 main ideas from this article. No matter what has been, what is important is what has to come. It's not about realpolitik. That's a German, you understand, it's realpolitik, it's a Germanism in English, as far as I know, also the politics of reality. It's not about realpolitik, it's about instigation. So no matter what people say, no matter what seems to be possible, no matter whatever, we make action to make things in any way moving. I have to think of this Walt Disney movie, this beer in this Walt Disney Zeichentrickfilm. Maybe not. It's just an idea. So, parliaments, that's important. Democracy, democratic structures do not grasp the real issues because they are corrupted by any other detailed interests. So, and activists are inspired, in the sense of Rudolf Eucken, futurists against all kinds of doubters. These are the 4 characteristics of activism, and we can now look to other phenomena to see whether this characteristics work or don't work. Sorry. So, some words about activism, messy construct, or essentially contested concept. So, messy construct, some of you after, of course, will know that from teacher professionalization research. It's from M. Frank Pajaris, 1992. It's about teacher beliefs. And the diagnosis from Pajaris was that everybody speaks about teacher beliefs, but nobody can really explain what it is. And the explanation and the reasoning about this situation among the researchers, quite, let's say, disappointing and sad situation, but they met on congresses, wanted to discuss about teacher beliefs, and everybody was speaking about another thing. So it wasn't working. All the empirical research was running into an empty street. So the reasoning was, okay, teacher beliefs is a messy construct, okay, we have to accept it, let's go on, let's collect our third-party funds and celebrate our professorships. Pajaris said, it's disappointing, it's not working, we have to change it. And he tried, in this famous article, he tried to define and construct a concept of teacher belief, what was able to gather all other ideas, to be coherent, to be logically working, and to be empirically adaptable to specific research. So this is the one approach. The second approach is from Walter Bryce Gawley, 1956. This is also a very famous article about essentially contested concepts. So, for example, society or justice or something like that. And Gawley, as a philosopher, was arguing that we are just not able to create concepts, we find agreements about concepts, because the things we try to understand with these concepts are so colorful, so diverse, so historically loaded, that we will never be able to develop a joint and agreed concept about this. I think when we speak about activism, we can be on the Pajaris side, or we can be on the Gawley side. The colleagues know me better, know that I'm a Pajaris man, and I want to go on this way. So if we, let's say, one argument against Gawley and against the application of Gawley to activism. I don't want to dive too deep into the theory of concepts here and now. But okay, you know, we can distinct between logical terms, nominal terms, functional terms, historical terms, meta-historical terms. So there is not only one kind of term. So the first thing we can do is to think about what kind of term is activism. And I think what was Gawley speaking about were, let's say, a kind of meta-historical concepts like society. So society is a term you will be seen applicated today in many forms, but historical research and so on apply this concept also to Greek society, as I tell you, or to let's say Indian groups, to avoid the term society, in at the Ganges, at the banks of Ganges in 200, let's say in the year 200 after Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's it. That was a So I think activism belongs not to this kind of terms. Activism is a clear historical term. This is my thesis. We can follow the trace of this term very precisely. We can see from which person, at which position, in which context it firstly arises, then who's the next one taken over, what happens to this concept, and so on. And that's why I think Gawley and Pajaris are right if we distinct between different kinds of terms. So Gawley is right for meta-historical terms, and Pajaris is right for historical terms. To make the things one step more complicated, all of you know that meta-historical terms can become historical. Yeah, but this is a specific case I don't want to speak here now. So, back to Pajaris. Having Pajaris under our arms, we go to the word of phenomena. Okay, that's okay. These are my arguments. So, we have plenty of different activisms. Climate, art activism, memory activism, internet activism, economic activism, science activism, peace activism, XYZ activism. So what we can see here is that we can change the adjective to activism quite freely. Yeah, everything can be related to activism. Yeah, that's the first experience. Every society practice, on the other hand, can be turned into activism. So the basic idea is that terms have a relation to the reality. So the observation that you can apply a diverse, multiple number of adjectives to activism means that you have also in the reality phenomena of activism in nearly every thinkable form of societal practice. So, and if we follow this idea, we can speak, to using a metaphor, we can speak about activism as a state of aggregation of societal practices. So like H2O changes from ice to water to air, societal practices can change their states of aggregation. And activism is one state of aggregation, and it's for sure not the ice. And if we have in mind what Hiller has written, that's why I kept this on the presentation, no matter what has been, what's important. We have 4 characteristics of this state of aggregation of societal practices. These are clear empirical characteristics. So let's go on. So what is activism? Again, to quote Hiller, and then next one, please. If we try to make a summary, we can say activism is a counter-institutional, counter-traditional type of societal practice, futuristic oriented. It is linked, that's a new idea now here, it's linked to generational fractures. And in that that sense, a vehicle of conflicts. That's why we have, for historians maybe interesting, that's why I think we can observe that in the one, let's say, in the continuation of the time, we don't have at every time peaks of activism. We have at specific times peaks of activism. At specific times, this state of aggregation of societal practice. And these peaks, this is an empirical hypothesis, is linked to times of generational conflicts. So it was in the beginning of the 20th century when the traditions, institutions didn't fit anymore to the realities, and you can say it's a situation now too. A next characteristic is multiple adjectival specification mark sectorial modes of play. So art activism is linked to political or climate activism, but it's not the same. And if I speak about modes of play, I'm at the very moment by Wittgenstein, we are speaking about games of language. That's why there is a relationship between all these activisms, but they are not identical. So. And my thesis is this definition would work for activism in and through histories at all. If you think about Thukydides, now it comes to Thukydides. If you think about Thukydides and Alcibiades, this jeunesse dorée in the late Attic Republic, you have this youth movement, you have this unsatisfaction with traditions, you want to have the change, you want to have revolutionary acts, you ignore societal context, you make everything what these two young lads in 1987 in this godforsaken East German town have done. So the Alcibiades we can see throughout history again and again. This is activism. Next one, some other examples. The Eucken and Hiller and others' impulse was instrumentalized politically immediately in the 1920s. So the fascist movement and the communist movement too adopted this futuristic habit, these futuristic methods, and the idea we have to revolutionize our thinking, to build everything new, quasi the day after Kurt Hiller's article. And I refer to Clarissa saying public history isn't neutral. Yes, public history isn't, but activism is not public history, and and activism is specific society practice. It is an empty container. It is a word I return to that later, but it's important. Activism itself is an empty container. So maybe you know, in 1932, Joseph Goebbels founded the Central Office for Intellectual Activism at the Imperial Propaganda Ministry in Germany. Maybe you know that one of the triggers of the Čistka, of the mass murdering in the Soviet Union in the late 1930s, was triggered by the Stakhanov movement. And the Stakhanov movement, no surprise, was an activist movement. Maybe you know that in Germany, also the Communist Party, this is the picture there, resorted on activist actions, which were totally unusual before the World War I, before the activist idea. So political methods have developed by the impulse of activism, art activism and others. And just a side note, my very first book published in 2000 was dedicated to history, propaganda, and activist movement in East Germany. So it's an old issue for me. So let's go. Yeah, okay. But it's now a bit faster. So I told you activism is an empty container. It's principally empty and be filled as required. It's let's say a bunch of habits and methods. And we as historians, we can refer, if let's say activism is our object of research, we can refer to all usual forms of source criticism and rational judgment. We have to do case-by-case examination because activism isn't activism. There is good and bad activism. Maybe there is more bad activism principally than good activism. Maybe there is among the bad activisms a better, a less worse activism and a very worse activism. There's a, let's say, a spectrum of activism we can develop on the basis of these definitions. So the label activism grants no advance credit for anything. Questions: activism from above or from below? In dictatorships, we often, at the beginning of dictatorships, we often have activism from above because they want to crash traditional institutions. And they use youth movements and their enthusiasm and so on to establish the new order of things. So activism, let's say, is a precondition to have an Orwellian society. I'm quite provocative, I know. So the next question is, who are the players, which goals, which means, methods? And if a movement raises moral claims, as activists every time do, and let's say perpetually, and let's say with much stress in their voice, it is for me and people like me also the first invitation to apply ethic test methods, like the categorical imperative or something like that. So, thank you. Summary. So if activism is counter-institutional, counter-traditional type of societal practice, futuristic-oriented, then it's hardly compatible with historical research based on institutional stability. We need archives. We need libraries. Two aspects. There is a first aspect, security of transmission and tradition. Every regime change, every revolution is always linked with destruction of institutions of tradition. And the second thing, also very important, security of respect according to better argument. For activists, it's very hard to let's say, to work with traditional argumentation and traditional forms of exchanging thoughts and arguments, because they know better. They have the truth. They have the future in their mind. They are youth. But what if we have once destroyed all the regulations? So it's a question of freedom. So now that's, if I would end here, you would be quite, let's say, sad, and you would be go to Vienna and think, what a conservative, ugly city and people. So let's go on. So, but how to challenge anti-epistemic institutions, rules, persons of power? Because they are. And generational conflicts and generational upheavals and protests are mostly not unfounded. Not the protest is unfounded, only activist hopes. So the answer is quite simple, by civic engagement. It shouldn't be falsely categorized as activism. And this is the distinction between activities which we like, which we want to have, collaborations with civic movements, support of their activities, support of protests, everything okay. But we should not call it activism, because this is really something different. Okay? So, I know it's quite hard to do without false but very fancy juvenile concepts. But concepts make norms, concepts make actions, concepts make words. The way we are thinking, the way we are speaking shapes our society. And that's why it's really important to distinguish different forms of history-related societal practices. Many thanks for your patience.